Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Behind the Curtain with the Sound on Stage. I'm Greg Heilman, and joining me today is Sarah Harlett. She is starring as the nurse in the upcoming production of Romeo and Juliet here at Seattle Shakespeare, which opens April 24th next week and runs through May 12th. The show is directed by Sheila Daniels, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So thanks for taking some time to talk to us about not just your character, but some of the other things that I know that you've done with Seattle Shakespeare. And I guess let's start there.
Okay.
You were dramaturg and intimacy director on The Bed Trick.
Yeah.
I have here that you were a text coach for Macbeth,
Yep.
Among other things. And you're also an instructor at Cornish College of the Arts.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's talk about your relationship with Seattle Shakespeare. Obviously, that goes back a little bit. How did that get started?
Yeah. It started as I was an actor in a production of Two Gentlemen of Verona back in like the 90s, in the late 90s, I think. And so that was my first show that I ever did with them. And now I'm still acting with them. I've done all kinds of, worn all kinds of hats with Seattle Shakespeare in the past, primarily actor, but I've done intimacy direction for their educational tours, of which Macbeth is the latest one, and intimacy direction for The Bed Trick. I did some intimacy consulting on Mary Wives of Windsor. So I've been working in that capacity with them for a while. I even was a costume designer on one of their shows for Would Know, which is their outdoor Shakespeare that they do in the summertime. So so Seattle Shakespeare is near and dear to my heart. I've been able to perform some of the most amazing roles I've ever had a chance to play, in part because of Seattle Shakespeare. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll get to Romeo and Juliet and your role here in a second, but I want to go back a couple of months, or maybe not even that long, to The Bed Trick.
Okay, yeah.
So Keiko Green's original production that debuted here. Fantastic show. So now you had wore two hats, I guess you could, so to speak. You were the dramaturg. Is it dramaturg or dramaturg?
Dramaturg.
Okay.
And then it's dramaturgy. It's
okay.
Like the sort of that part of it, right?
Okay,
yeah.
and intimacy direction. So what exactly does a dramaturgist do, especially for a new production like that?
Yeah. So I love people who are dramaturgs are extraordinary. And this was just like a step into it, because as an intimacy director, we're trained in consent-based practices. And of course, The Bed Trick is all about consent, right? So I was like, Michaela, wait, what if I do like a little bit of dramaturgy along with the intimacy direction, so I can give the actors a background on like, what are all the different power dynamics that exist? What are different kinds of coercion? Where's the 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old brain development at this point? So all things that I felt like that might help them inform their character or inform the story for them more specifically. So that was a specific ask that I did of Michaela. I've never done dramaturgy on another show before. This was the first one that I was like, I really want to do this. So dramaturgy they're incredible people, and they give you all kinds of background that sort of lead up to what the story is. So that might be like, for instance, Hello Dolly, the dramaturg on Hello Dolly did a bunch of dramaturgy on where that story came from, but also what life is like in the time period
right?
Where it's set, right? So you have an idea as an actor or as a director, whatever your capacity is, of, okay, what are regular sort of interactions and what are irregular reactions? How's the culture changed in that time versus today? What are all what's the research? It's like the librarians, right?
Yeah.
What's the research that you can do?
Now, do you sit down with you do this research? You probably watch Revenge of the Nerds, or,
right.
That was my first.
All the references,
all the references for the bedroom.
Yeah.
Do you sit down then with the actors and present them what you found, or is it when an actor's trying to develop their character, they come to you and say, what would this person be thinking in this case? How does that work?
Well, it for me in what I did, since it was very parallel to being an intimacy director.
Sure.
So I did a presentation of, all right, here's what consent is. Here's what power dynamics. Here's coercion. Here's like all of this. And so I did a big presentation, and then I connected it to my intimacy directing work by like, here are some tools that you can use in the room to make sure that in the room we are using consent-based practices to create this work. And then if there's any questions that pop up for you of, all right, there's a reference to this, what is that, what is that, then I can support in that way too.
Gotcha. And then moving on to the intimacy direction part, which is something that has been lacking for so long on stage and in Hollywood, but so important. When, I guess my question is, how do you sit down, do actors come to you beforehand and say, these are my boundaries, this is what I'm comfortable doing, or do you kind of initiate that conversation as well?
It depends on the project. Usually what happens is, for theater, I will get a script, I'll look through that script and note for myself, okay, these are moments that I see that could be moments of intimacy that I can help out with. And I will have a conversation with the director on what their vision is, what they want to see. Like for example, with the bed trick, there is a bed trick in it, right? So working with Michaela on what her vision of that actual bed trick was, so that I'm clear on the story that the director wants to tell.
Okay.
And since Keiko was in the room, Keiko, who was the playwright, was in the room, then it also became a conversation of, well, what does Keiko envision when she wrote it, right? And then at that point, then I go, okay, actors, what are your boundaries? What are your physical boundaries? Like where do you consent to be touched? Where do you not consent to be touched? Here's the story we want to tell. Let's create choreography together, so it's participatory, that creates the story that Michaela and Keiko and the actors want to tell that works within their boundaries.
Yeah, and it seemed the creation of Bed Trick, back from the workshopping and even into the production, seemed like a collaborative process all the way through.
Yeah.
So, and it was nice. And whenever you have a chance to have the playwright in the room, I imagine it's such an advantage.
It's amazing. I mean, there's a ton of things I'd love to ask William Shakespeare.
That was my segue to the next part, the playwright that's not in the room.
Exactly.
So Romeo and Juliet opens up here on April 24th and runs through May 12th. And you're playing the nurse, which is a pretty important character. You're sort of Juliet's confidant. You're one of the only characters in the show that kind of know what's going on as far as this romantic relationship is going. Have you done Romeo and Juliet previously?
I've never done Romeo and Juliet before, which is something because I've done a lot of Shakespeare productions, but I've never been in a Romeo and Juliet before. I've seen a bunch of them, but never done it myself. Yeah, I get to play the nurse. I also get to play the prince, too.
Okay.
So I get two roles that are very, very different.
Yeah.
And yes, the nurse as the confidant. And also, Shakespeare does this thing in every play where there are characters that are sort of like the everybody character, like the common people, right? So the nurse and the friar are kind of those people. So the lower class people, who have a different kind of perspective and a different kind of language that they use too. So it's really fun.
So how do you prepare for something like Romeo and Juliet, that has been done so much before, to try to bring something new or unique to it?
It's so hard. I mean, it's I was lucky enough to also performed a few years ago the role of Richard III in Richard III. So whenever you've got a role that you're like, it's an iconic role, it's an iconic play. Romeo and Juliet is an iconic play. The nurse, there's like an image already of like who the nurse is or what it should be. I think my job is always to go back to what is the script actually saying. I've got to forget all of those images and movies that I watched in the past and go, okay, what is the story? How do I connect to the story. Like, what about it resonates? And what's the truth that I can find inside that character to play? Ultimately, I've got to look for what there is a truth inside that character that is a human character that I've got to connect to in order to play.
It takes you back sort of to your roots of acting, right?
Yeah.
And probably is even, I would imagine, more challenging to get rid of that noise that's in your head from these previous productions.
Yeah.
So what can audiences expect out of this version of Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah. Well, it's set now, right? So it's a very, so it's not like we'll be wearing corsets or anything like that. It's set now, today. It is, there's some incredible, it takes place on a playground too. That's the set, is a playground. It's sort of like a broken down playground too. So that's where it sits, and then it moves around from there too. But it's today, and it's also
I had one Christian school.
a really beautiful kind of, really beautiful, honest, funny telling of the story. There's humor like throughout the whole script that you don't necessarily remember.
Yeah.
But it really pops up, and it's also, of course, it's devastating, right? Spoiler alert. It's like it doesn't end happily.
No risk
right?
of spoilers here.
Right. But so I think it's a really beautiful thing. We're tonight we are going into technical rehearsals for it. So, and that's always so excited because you start to see all the design elements and all the other artistry that's going to create the whole world. So we've done all this research, or all this work, research, everything that we've done up until this point as actors, and now we get to play with all of the designers too.
Yeah.
So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, it's always hectic. Tech Week is
Completely.
Hell Week,
Yeah.
sometimes it's called. So and I'm always interested to see what certain directors will do as far as a vision to modernize it or whichever. And when you mentioned, modern clothing and things like that, and I used to think, and I know there's a whole group of people that are, I guess they would be against modernizing Shakespeare. They have a vision in their head of how it should be portrayed and how people should dress, but in Shakespeare's time, they wore the dress of the day. It wasn't like they wore certain outfits. So to modernize something is almost like treating Shakespeare in the manner in which it was intended.
Yeah. That's such a great point, right? They weren't like, let's put on this oldie-timey clothes. They just right? I mean, they might wear a toga or something for Julius Caesar, right? But yeah, it's a really great point.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So what is next for you after this? Do you have anything else scheduled?
I don't have any acting lined up yet. I am going to travel to London to take some more training and some workshops in intimacy direction in London. So that's my next sort of foray into one of the branches of artistry that I do. And I'm excited to learn what intimacy direction is overseas, like what it is in Europe too. How is it different than it is here? And
Culture's completely different. That's continentally. Asia's got different sort of attitudes in those regards.
Yeah.
Europe's is different. America's is different. Yeah. So I can imagine it's going to be.
It'll be fascinating.
So is that the direction that you're looking to get more into, doing more of that work?
Well, I'm already doing a lot of that work, and because that field is changing so much, I just am trying to be active in keeping my training up.
Sure.
So that the practices that I'm doing are the current practices. We're learning and discovering what quote unquote best practices can be, and we learn more the more that we do it, right? So so just trying to keep up with it right now. I am super lucky in that the juggling that I do in terms of all of my work happens to be things that I really love to do. So my acting and intimacy direction, and then teaching. I teach at Cornish College of the Arts too, and so those are kind of my three branches right now that keep me afloat, pay the bills,
Yeah,
and also
it's important.
Yeah, and also are things that I love to do. So
what's your favorite role that you've ever played? I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Favorite role, most challenging role, and dream role that you haven't played yet.
favorite role is probably Richard III, because that was the role that I never thought I would be able to. Never even sort of occurred to me that I might be able to play that role at some point. As a 5'2.5" blonde woman, so it just wasn't something that I thought I'd be able to do. So that was probably my favorite role, and working with Seattle Shakespeare Company and Upstart Crow Collective. That was a co-pro with both of them. Dream role. I don't know. I love new work so much, so I kind of feel like my dream role might be a role that I don't know exists
Hasn't
yet.
even been created yet.
Yes, exactly. Right? Like I am. Yeah. I don't have one that I'm pining for. I just like pine for more work and working with more people and more projects.
Yeah.
So,
And working in this community is just, it's the best community I found. It's inclusive. It's just a big family.
yeah.
Oh, most challenging role. Would that also be Richard
Oh,
Richard III, or is there a different one?
I mean, that was pretty challenging, but I'm gonna say most challenging was I played the role of Demetrius in Titus Andronicus,
Okay.
and that is a character who's just foul, just like does horrible things, the bloodiest play in all of Shakespeare. And that was a challenge to figure out. So if we go back to like I was talking about, you look for whatever it is that resonates for you, and you look for what it is that you can, how you could honestly tell the story and connect with the character. And that was a tough one to go, all right, how do I find the honesty inside of this character? How do I find what resonates for me in this one? So that was super challenging.
Yeah, there's a lot of actors who love to play those kind of off-type characters.
Yeah.
Nice people that like to play mean characters. And
Yeah.
it's probably the entire cast of Game of Thrones is that way.
Right.
But,
yeah, I've played a lot of foul characters. Yeah.
but I guess it's because it's got to be a challenge. It's got to, which keeps your acting chops fresh, and I imagine is just something that's allows you to really dig into it.
And I think ultimately, at least for me, it forces me to reckon with humanity in a different kind of way. Like it forces me to not judge my character, right? To not sort of say that is a evil being that, I am nothing like, but, that is somebody who is vengeful. Well, can I relate to being vengeful? I don't think of myself as a vengeful person, but I've definitely like, when I'm in the car and somebody cuts me off, I definitely have vengeful feelings, right? So you can even start with like the nugget of that, of like, there is, if these are human people, then I've got to look for what the humanity
For sure.
is. So it's a good sort of like, what am I judging? Who am I judging? Right? Is there another way to look at it?
Yeah, and that's one. If nothing else, lately the rise of the anti-hero in popular culture, whether it's Darth Vader in Star Wars or any of these other characters, where you learn their backstory and learn that they're not born evil necessarily.
Right.
There's something that happens, or there's something that creates this evilness in them, which is usually fear or something like that. And it allows you to connect as a human to even these characters that just seem so horrific.
Right. Yeah.
So
it also makes them. In some ways, it makes them scarier.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. Yeah, especially if you can find something in yourself that equates to something they've done, and you see the path they go down. Yeah. So. Well, you've got to get to tech rehearsal.
I do.
And I appreciate the time you've taken to speak with me here about your upcoming role in Romeo and Juliet. So Sarah Hartlett, I appreciate the time. Thank you for joining me. The show runs on stage here at Seattle Shakespeare from April 24th through May 12th. Again, you can see Sarah as the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. I think I'm gonna be here May 1st for the show. So not opening weekend, but the week after that.
Excellent.
So I am looking so forward to seeing it, and I love the work everybody did on the bed trick. It was just phenomenal. So I appreciate that as well. So Thank you all for watching. Once again, Greg Heilman with the Sound on Stage. So until next time, I will see you at the stage door.